I'm Bonnie McTaggart, I guess you all know me, and I'm talking about preserving food by dehydration. So my interest in dehydrating food started about 40 years ago when I started doing week-long and more canoe trips and paddling out on Georgian Bay and the French River. And after about day 3, all the nice apples and carrots and bananas and things you had brought were just not edible. So back to base camp and figuring out how to deal with this. So I very quickly realized that dehydrating food was what you do if you're going to be out where you can't get fresh stuff. So the dehydration preserves the food by basically just eliminating the water. And most fruit and vegetables have 80–90% water in them. And so you get rid of the water and that preserves the food. And it also hugely reduces the size of the food and the weight of the food, which the weight of the food, of course, is a big concern if you're carrying your pack on your back and doing portaging. So you want less bulk and less weight, plus a preserved food. So it's certainly the answer. And as Chris said, dehydration is a natural process, and in many cultures it was used for people that had an excess of food in one season to store that food and preserve it so they would have the use of it later on. And in many places it was just sun-dried or sun and wind. And the folks way back in this country always did apples, tomatoes, shelled beans, like not green beans, but the ones that you would shell out, peas, corn, and in the Maritimes, fish is still, you see it in people's backyards. They have these great little racks and they have all the fish hanging down and they're drying in what little sunshine they get and the wind. For the purpose of dehydrating, you have the sun, you have a dehydrator, which is this unit, and they're all different styles and different kinds. So this one is, I've had this one for about 35 years. It has 4 shelves in it and these racks, and you just put the food on there and pop them in. And then this one has, they all have to have some kind of an energy source, heat source, be it the sun or in this case a little electrical thing, and a fan. And the fan is very important because that helps to eliminate the humidity. And this one has a thermostat, so it goes from 85 degrees, which would not dry much at all, up to vegetables, fruits and leathers, and then for meat you need a higher temperature. And keeping in mind that we are not cooking things, things are just being dried, they're still raw.
So I have a question. So when you want to reconstitute it and add water, then they will still be raw. You still have to cook.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Now, Bonnie, is in reference to the dehydrator, you've had that one for 30 years, but is there anything, if you were going to buy one, that you would say, look for this, or how, make sure it's got this temperature range, or, because you've worked with it for a long time?
Well, I haven't shopped for food dehydrators. Pete got me this one, and basically you just need a heat source, and you need something that's going to be, depending on what you're wanting to do. This one's handy for me because I'm often doing more than one type of vegetable at a time. Like if I'm making a meal for a camping trip, I might need 1 onion and 2 carrots and a green pepper and something. So you can put one on each thing and keeps them easier to work with. But they're all different kinds. I don't know. You just have to figure what you want.
Yeah, but I just meant in terms of the amount of heat you need to dry something. Do you know, can you give us a...
Well, what's the range on this one?
Well, it's, most things are 120 degrees, 125 degrees. And if you're using your oven, which is also the third way, you don't have to have a dehydrator, especially if you just want to try it out and see if you like dehydrated stuff and if it's going to suit your purposes. You just use your own oven, and it really doesn't matter what kind of an oven it is. And in my book I go into this in more detail, but you have to turn the oven on just until that first little, like on mine, there's a little red light comes on. Mm-hmm. Okay, you just turn it very slowly until just that little red light comes on, and then you leave it there. And that's about 115 to 130 degrees, 125 degrees. And then the oven will just stay, it'll heat it to that temperature, and then it will just Every once in a while it'll just come on, but it'll only be just a few seconds, so things aren't getting cooked or burned. It's just enough to keep the oven up to that temperature. And then also you have to leave the oven door propped open, and you can stick a wooden spoon or something in. That's to, again, get rid of the humidity. And you can put things on baking sheets, or an easier way and a better way is just to use a sheet of parchment paper and just put that right out, take your oven rack right out of the oven, put this thing of parchment paper down, load it up, put it back in the oven. And that works really well. So until you sort of establish your need or your then if you really like the whole thing, then go out and look at dehydrators. But
So it never has to go above 120 or something?
no, because then you're cooking.
Cooking, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
So the thing is to keep the temperature only
Only
enough
that.
to meet the purpose, and it's the length of the drying then. It's not quick, but you have to keep the temperature low so you're not
And does it
cooking.
matter if different vegetables touch each other?
No,
Doesn't
No.
matter.
no.
So if you have a convection feature on your
That
oven,
would
then
be
that
quite-
would be helpful
would be
because
quite
you've got the
helpful.
fan going too, it's
Yeah,
going
and
faster.
I haven't ever tried using, because I don't have a convection oven, but I suspect you do not have to leave the oven door propped open. A couple years ago, Luke brought a whole bunch of tomatoes from the university farm, and they had these wonderful tomatoes, and I had a lot of them, and they were these lovely plum tomatoes. So I would do them on the big sheets, do a couple of racks in the oven, and then as they shrink down, like say, put them in overnight, so give them their 10 or 12 hours, and then the next morning, by now they've really shrunk down, then put them in here, and then you can finish them in here. So,
Would you cut them?
oh yes,
Oh, you
I'll
cut
go into
them.
that, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
So now so that's the 3 different ways, and so now I'm going to show you how you prepare the food. So I'm just going to do a carrot just because it's easy, and it's quite important when you're preparing the vegetables or the fruit that it's the same as when you're making cookies. If you have a big cookie and a little cookie and you think they're going to cook at the same time, the one's going to be burnt and the other one. So you just, when you're chopping your vegetables, just try to really be fairly precise and get some nice uniformity with the pieces. Then you just put those onto the rack, and the more you spread them out, and as Anna was saying, like if you have them all bundled up, they're not going to dry as quickly. So the thing is to sort of have them in one layer so they can get the air circulation from the bottom and the top. But you can see how one carrot is going to,
We have a lot of room
yeah.
taken.
And then you just put it in here. And so what I do usually is start one batch in the evening, let it go overnight, then in the morning you come down and you pull them out. Things are dry. You take those out, package them up, and you put another lot in for the day. So you can quite easily run 2 shifts a day with this kind of a machine. Then so this is a whole carrot. That was a whole carrot.
Let's see.
And,
around there?
yeah, and that's dehydrated now.
Do you find,
Oh, my
I mean, I
goodness.
know you do a lot of outdoor activities, but when if you're not doing that,
whole
would you use
carrot.
them for soups and stews and that sort of thing, or are you
Well,
only using them for outdoor activities?
For my purposes, the only things I've dried are, well, my daughter used to like banana chips, so I used to make banana
Right.
chips.
My
And
goodness.
I have done the, what we call sun-dried tomatoes or dehydrated tomatoes. I've done those for my own purposes. But no,
Yeah.
basically, for my use, it's for
Travel.
for camping.
Yeah.
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 So, but with my daughter going to Labrador on this thing, she's a vegetarian and she's a bit concerned about what she's going to have to eat up there.
Right.
And so I said, well, I'll make you a couple of dry dinners and she can take them up, so.
You do beans and stuff like beans, raw beans in the
Yeah,
temperature as well?
that,
You put a bean in there?
well, beans, you have to, it's beans and beans. Okay, so you have green beans, which you have to, some vegetables you have to blanch them first. I think you have to blanch beans. I have a list somewhere. You have to blanch beans, you have to blanch broccoli, and you have to blanch cauliflower. Otherwise, something about the enzymes in the food, they do something to the nutritive value of the food when it's frozen. If they just sit in the freezer, there'll be no food value. And corn too, I think, has to be, so if I was getting ready to go out camping and I wanted a cup of corn, I would use a cup of frozen corn because it's been blanched. And then you've eliminated that process. But the other kind of beans, like if you're talking about chickpeas or kidney
Legumes, I guess,
beans,
in our way.
they're in a tin, they're cooked. They're
Right.
cooked in the tin. They're all ready to eat in that tin. So a lot of my recipes have different kinds of beans or peas or whatever, chickpeas. So what you do is you open the can, rinse them really well, and then drain them really well. Then you put them on the rack and you dehydrate them. So when you go to use them at the campsite, you don't have to start it with soaking them in water for 10 hours and boiling them. Like, they're cooked. They're very handy, but I've had people that didn't read the recipes properly and they're thinking that they'll go to the bulk store and get a cup of beans
Right.
that are dried beans,
Right.
but they're not cooked. Of course,
Right.
that's hopeless. It's not going to work at all,
It's
so.
gonna have a lot of fire
Yeah,
to those
yeah,
beans.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, so there's that distinction there. Now, this hasn't been had that long yet. It takes about a half hour or a little more to rehydrate, but that's one of the ones that was in the bag
In the bank, carrot.
that was dehydrated, and now it's rehydrating.
So you do that for making soups or things like that, or just for nibbling, just like eating, just direct? Or
Well, no, in my cookbook, like here's, okay, they opened up a recipe called lentil and red pepper stew. So it says to be dried, 2 large onions, 2 red peppers, 6 to 8 mushrooms, 2 carrots grated, and a can of navy beans that have been rinsed and drained.
Right.
Okay, so then you have everything in these, I do everything up in these little baggies. And the reason for that is that, for instance, if one of your vegetables wasn't properly dried, then you're going to lose your whole dinner. And in my case, I'm out in the middle of Georgian Bay,
Right.
and you have no dinner, and you're not about to
There's
get
nothing
anything
else.
else. It's this or nothing, so it's better to have a dinner that's missing something than not have a dinner, so. But
So
anyway,
you-
all you do is put, in my case, you put everything in a big pot, so you have your big cook pot, and it'll tell you, like in the case of lentil and red pepper stew, it'll say at the campsite, rehydrate the dried vegetables and beans in 8 cups. So I'll put 8 cups of water in the cook pot, and then just dump all the stuff in, let it rehydrate for a half an hour, and then put it on the stove, on the campfire and cook it.
So it rehydrates in the cold water?
Mhm.
And how long had this one been rehydrating?
No, maybe about 15 or 20
So
minutes,
it'd
so.
be twice as big by the time it's
Yeah,
ready to
and
go.
and also with the heat, when you put the heat to it too. So I mean, it looks like a carrot again when you eat your meal.
It's about
So
30
it's-
minutes, you said?
Mhm.
30
So,
minutes.
so everything's raw, and when you rehydrated, it's still raw. Then you put the pot on and you cook it, and then your meal is cooked. So it's, you're not nibbling carrots and,
Okay.
yeah.
I have another question.
Mhm.
Is it necessary, if, let's say you're going to do a stew,
Mhm.
and you have it dehydrated, tomatoes or something, can you just dump it straight into the pot, or do you have to rehydrate first?
Well, when you're camping, it's the same pot anyway. You have to
Oh.
rehydrate it, so you have to know how much water to put in.
Oh.
And that varies a bit from recipe.
Oh.
These recipes are all set up for 4 people, so
Right,
it's
right.
just the way it works out. But
Yeah,
it tells you how much water, then you just dump everything in the
I
water,
see.
and then it rehydrates.
Hydrates, and
Yeah,
you
and
can
then
But
it's
if you
cooked.
were doing it at home,
Mhm.
the same thing then? You just put everything into the,
Do you
Mhm.
rehydrate first and then cook it, or that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Or
you
can
have
you
to.
cook it all in one?
Well, you rehydrate it for half an hour, and then you just put it on.
Okay.
I mean, it's seamless.
Half an
You just,
oh, I see, so
yeah.
you don't have to pour the water out?
Oh, no.
Oh.
That's the same water.
Same
Uh-huh.
It's a
water.
good
Yeah.
value in the water. I
That
think.
becomes
Oh,
part of the meal.
okay.
You need the water for this,
Right.
it makes its own sauce,
Okay.
or in the case of stew, then you put dumpling in on top or something, and
Okay,
it, like you make.
that
Yeah.
was the question, like, do you have to change the water?
No,
But you
no,
don't.
no,
Okay.
no. So if you wanted to do a whole bunch of a vegetable and then use them for soup, you would just, as you start to make soup, you put your stock on or your water on, and you pop these in, and then they would just rehydrate
Okay.
as it was going.
Bonnie, do you know, excuse me, about vitamin loss in this process? Is it great or not?
It's negligible.
Is it?
Yeah, dehydrating doesn't destroy the nutritive value of the food. The only thing is the few I mentioned that you have to blanch first. Otherwise, the nutritive value is lessened in them, the same as it is in freezing.
Right. So
So,
which ones were the ones that you do need to blanch?
well, let's see, I know it's green beans, and it's broccoli and cauliflower, and I thought leeks had to be cooked before they were frozen, or there wasn't nutritive value. Well, yeah, okay, that was my understanding.
Corn you said.
And corn, again, I thought it had to be blanched before, to really have any nutritive value. But I mean,
So it would be blanched and
there's not
then
much
dehydrated.
nutritive value in corn anyway,
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
it's-
Blanched and then dehydrated, if I
Yeah.
want to.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Not that much. He's gonna talk a lot about that.
Okay, so then I also did apple, and so I had a Granny Smith apple, and to do apples, they used to have bees way back in the pioneer days. They'd have an apple drying day bee, and everybody would get together, well, everybody, the moms and the kids, and they would peel the apples, and then they have this gadget to take the core out, and so you'd have all these apple slices, and then it was the children's. These have been dried in the dehydrator, and they're leathery and they're preserved. But the children would take the raw apple slices and put them on strings. They'd go through, the kids would sit there and string them all up. So you'd have all these wet apple slices, and you'd probably have seen this at places like Dune and that. And then they'd hang them up over the kitchen stove, up by the ceiling where there's more heat and a bit of air circulation, and they would just live up there. And then when Mom wanted to make an apple pie, she'd get down enough and go ahead and make a pie. And I've never done an apple pie with dried apple, but I think you probably have to put them in a bowl and rehydrate them before you do.
Can you eat them like that? Do they
Oh,
taste
yeah.
like that? Yeah.
You can, except they're not sweet, but I mean, they're
When you're
fine.
camping sometimes.
That's
you
a piece of
eat
raw
like
apple.
snacks.
Right.
Yeah, although for snack food, often we make things that are called leathers. And in that case, you would use, like, say, the applesauce as a base, and then you could put raspberries or something in it, and then you just spread that out on the sheet here, on a piece of wax paper, and put it on the sheet and dry it, and then roll them up. And you can make some great, like those things that they have.
roll-ups, yeah, for the kids.
Uh-huh, yeah. Yeah, it works really well.
Now, dried apples in my country were, dried fruit was extremely popular
Mhm.
and hung, in the
Yes.
kitchen like that.
Uh-huh.
And all kinds of fruit.
Yes.
I actually love them like that. They
Yeah.
don't need any
Uh-huh.
sugar or anything.
I know, they're
Perfect.
Then we also did tomatoes. So the plum tomatoes, or Italian-style tomatoes, are easier to use because they're a little bit more meaty and not quite so much juice in them. And so this tomato, I would cut it in half and then make it into eighths. And that's what I did here. So you can see how, so 8 of these would be,
And you didn't seed it? or
No,
You just
no.
took what you had?
yeah,
And left the skin on and everything.
you leave everything on. So that's 1 tomato, but you can see how that would all be,
Wow.
and that's totally preserved, so. And they come out, now, to do, when you're drying, you can really not err on the side of, oh, don't tell my son-in-law, I think I just did a pun. You cannot err in this, in over drying. You can only err in under drying. Because when things are dry, they're dry.
They're dry.
I mean, if you've taken out all the water, it's still blowing around and it's still sitting in here, but nothing's happening. It's just gonna stay at that state, whatever it's at. But if you don't dry things enough, then especially if things are out in a pack laying in the sun, and there's a little bit of moisture in there, they can go off. But you really can't over dry things.
So not
No.
so-
So this tomato, for example, I feel it and it feels still, it's soft, it's
Mhm.
not dry like the other things. How do you actually
How do
know
you
when
know?
you're far
Well,
enough?
a little bit of it is just sort of trial and error. When Luke gave me all those tomatoes a couple of years ago, and I had a whole bunch, I dried them, and I had them in bigger pieces. They were a little bit smaller tomato, and I think I just cut them in half, so they were fairly, like a little bite each one. I put them in Ziplocs and put them in the freezer.
Oh, as insurance?
Yeah, or the fridge, as an insurance. Or in the case of sun-dried tomatoes, you probably have bought them in oil.
Yeah, something.
Yeah, if you dry them with tomatoes especially, if you dry them until they're brittle, they really don't rehydrate rather easily. They always stay a little bit sort of too chewy or tough. They go a bit tough, yeah. So there's a bit of a fine line there. And the other thing with tomato, when for the purpose of camping, you have, I mean, everything, spaghetti, stew, everything, you want a can of tomatoes. So you put that, you use a fairly thick tomato sauce, and you dehydrate it and make what you call a tomato leather. And so you end up out in the middle of Georgian Bay with your little roll-up of tomato leather, no can to bring back home, and it's lovely, and it really just reduces it right down. And the leathers, you just break them, I usually rip them up into pieces and put them into the water, and they very quickly rehydrate again. So that's a very useful tool as well.
Amazing that you can dehydrate sauce. That
Yeah.
sounds to be
Yeah,
totally
yeah, and you think of tomato leather instead of
Yeah.
the fruit leather.
Yeah.
So then storage, once things are dried, I put, where's our little Ziploc bag? I store things in these little Ziploc bags for my purpose, for going out camping. And then you would put all of these, so this would be your 1 carrot, and you'd have your 1 onion and your tomato sauce and everything, and you'd collate it all into one plastic bag, and you'd end up with a bag about the size of a pound of coffee, and that's dinner for 4 people. It's quite remarkable.
And light.
Yeah,
Very light.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
nice,
And some meals are less bulky. If you take out like say a kind of pasta that's a big kind of pasta, but the lentil meals are always the most compact and the most lightweight, so.
I saw
Anyway,
one going for a week, and she had one little bag like that.
Yeah,
And it was a food for 2 of them
Yeah.
for a whole week. It was
Yeah.
unbelievable.
it is, it's amazing, yeah. The native people and the pioneer women and so on, they didn't have Ziploc bags. I don't know how they kept house without them, but they would use tin boxes, or they would use crocks with lids and that sort of thing. The main thing is to keep the food away from humidity, because if it starts taking up, which it would take up humidity if it was allowed to, and then it could go off and could become contaminated and go off.
Is there a kind of sign that you know would be off? Like, would there be visible signs that
Yeah,
it's off?
like it was zucchini, I think, one time that wasn't dried enough, and it just went moldy.
So you can see mold.
Yeah, you knew right
smell
away.
mold.
Yeah, so you just don't put that in, because you know it's gone off, but and that's probably because it has so much water in it,
Yeah.
it's just hard to really get it right. So anyway, and then you just keep things in a cool, dry place. So you put it in the Ziploc bag, and when I'm doing stuff for camping, I would just make the meal and then just maybe stick it in the fridge or in a cool place till you're ready to go out. So, but the shelf life would actually be months
Yeah.
on a dehydrated meal. Yeah. And then it's the rehydration, which we have covered with that. So I think that's about it.
Wow.
What about meat? Is there
Mhm.
much difference when you're meat versus veggies?
No, there isn't much difference. There's an area for meat here. I guess the main thing is that you have to start with a really, really lean cut of meat, because it's the oil, the fat in the meat that is going to go off. It will go rancid.
Right.
So you have to get a really, really lean cut, and then it's just the usual thing. It's a little bit higher temperature. It says 135 to 145 for meat or jerky or chicken. You can do like dried chicken breast, white meat, or something like that. So.
Same shelf life as vegetables? Or?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
But you
And
cut
with the
it
meat,
small.
sometimes you cut it up into uniform sizes. I mean, whatever you have, it's eventually going to dry, but it's better to have it in small pieces, yeah, to make it easier. And with some of the meats, if you're doing beef jerky, you could put soy sauce and the spices or herbs and things on it too, when it's still moist, and it'll take that up better.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you ever put the spices in the vegetables?
No, I take
You
that.
keep it as a separate.
I keep all the spices in. It's remarkable, most of the recipes, just how much spices there are. I mean, in most of them, it's maybe 4 or 5 at least different spices and herbs. We use a lot.
So
Yeah.
those you bring separately in the little
Yeah.
pouches?
But I do all that at home. So for each meal, like say the chili, it says a bay leaf, a teaspoon of paprika, oregano, mustard powder, black pepper and salt, and 2 or 3 teaspoons of chili powder and garlic. So I would put all that into a little bag, into one bag, because you don't have to worry about them interfering with each other. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then when you're there, you just dump that in the pot with everything else, and you're not out at the campsite, you know, you want to be swimming or doing
Yeah.
whatever else. Completely different topic, but also preserving with vinegar.
Oh, yes.
So this has nothing to do with dehydrating. This is vinegars. And I make just a couple of kinds of vinegars. I tried some different kinds years ago. I tried cilantro, which did not work. I tried basil, which I just didn't think it worked. But I always make, this is dill vinegar. So what you do is just get a big glass jar, put your dill plant, the whole plant except for the root, just put the whole plant, the stalks and the flowers and the leaves and everything, just fold them up, shove them into a jar, and fill the jar up with any kind of a good grade white vinegar, and let it sit on the windowsill for a few weeks. And then you can, I usually pour it off, strain it.
Sorry, any particular vinegar, like 3%, 4%, doesn't matter?
I've never bothered much, I guess I
Just a regular
just,
vinegar.
yeah. Now you can use, you can use different kinds of vinegars, but you'll get a different product. I mean, you can go into some of the real fancy vinegars, like, you wouldn't use basil vinegar, but you might use like a red vinegar. It's just going to make a different product, but you'll still have your herb, which is what you're trying to do. This would be dill vinegar.
So this
Yeah.
is just to flavor the vinegar?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
good.
So,
Yeah.
you said sit it on the windowsill for a week, was there something?
No, for a
important-
few weeks.
A few weeks, is there something important about the light?
Yeah, well, it seems to, it sits in the sun and it seems to heat it a little bit. The
Okay.
sun warms it up, and then that seems to help draw the flavors out into the vinegar.
And just like you're showing there, just with the
Yep.
plastic with the
Yeah,
elastic?
I just put a lid on it.
So it's not a sealed, it is a
No,
sealed lid?
it's not really sealed, it's just a plastic over to
Yeah.
keep it clean. And then I would drain this through a sieve or something to get rid of the organic bits and put it off in, these are great bottles, these old girls beer bottles, because they have the rubber stopper on them. So you just sterilize them and fill them up with the vinegar. And then if you want, and if there are still herbs when you're doing this, if you get a little piece of fresh dill and stick it down, then it's you know, you can see it through, and you can also, it helps you identify which kind of vinegar it is, otherwise you have to put a label on it.
Right.
So,
Oh, this is
yeah.
nice.
So this is dill. I also successfully like chive blossoms, which make a really pretty pink vinegar, and they taste like chives. And tarragon is a good one, if you use tarragon. And basil, I didn't like the basil vinegar, but I've made basil oil. So you'd use a good grade of cooking oil and put the basil leaves into the cooking oil, and then I do that on the stove though on low heat and let it just sort of infuse, and the flavor comes out of the leaves and into the oil, and then you have to strain it. And that I would keep in the fridge for sure, and that would probably wouldn't have a huge long shelf life, but certainly a few months. And it's great for making omelet or sautéing or something. It's a nice flavor. The vinegars I use in salad dressing, and I use a lot of vinegars when I'm making soup, just because you can, it really cuts down on the amount of salt you need in the soup. It seems to bring out the flavors without having to add as much salt.
Do you ever use cider vinegar?
Yes,
Yeah, because I find like white vinegar is much more acidic,
yes,
and cider vinegar.
yeah, that's a good point. I knew there were other kinds of vinegars, and that would be a nice one to use for a lot of the herbs.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Hey.